Introduction. The day you stop blaming is the day your life changes. Right now, there's someone who started with less than you, who's been hurt worse than you, who's faced bigger obstacles than you. And they're winning. Not because they're smarter or luckier, but because they made one choice you haven't made yet. They stopped blaming everyone else and took full control of their life. This audiobook will show you exactly how to make that same choice. Because the moment you stop pointing fingers is the moment everything changes. And I'm going to prove it to you in the next hour and a half. You're stuck. Not because life is unfair, but because you've been playing the wrong game. You've been waiting for someone to save you, fix you, or give you permission to win. But nobody's coming. And that's actually the best news you'll ever hear. Here's what we're going to do together. We're going to dismantle the victim mentality that's been holding you hostage. We're going to destroy the excuses you've been using as shields. We're going to build a system that makes success inevitable instead of optional. And most importantly, we're going to help you take back the one thing you gave away without realizing it: your power. This isn't theory. This isn't motivational fluff. This is a step-by-step blueprint for taking full responsibility for your life and becoming the person you were always capable of being. If you apply what you learn here, you won't just think differently. You'll be living differently. You'll finally understand that your life is your responsibility. And that is your greatest power. So let me ask you, are you ready to stop being a passenger in your own life? Are you ready to grab the wheel and drive toward the future you actually want? Because the journey starts right now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, let's begin. Think about it. Right now, in this exact moment, you're either blaming or building. You're either pointing fingers at your past, your parents, your circumstances, your bad luck, or you're taking responsibility and moving forward. There's no middle ground. And every second you spend in blame mode is a second you're not spending in growth mode. That's the brutal truth nobody wants to face. But it's also the truth that will set you free. Here's what I know about you, even though we've never met. You've tried before. You've set goals, made plans, maybe even started strong. But somewhere along the way, things fell apart. And when they did, you looked around for reasons why. You found them too. Plenty of them. Valid ones even. But here's the problem. Those reasons became your prison. They became the story you tell yourself about why you can't move forward. And as long as that story is running in your head, you'll stay exactly where you are. But what if I told you that story is a lie? Not because your struggles aren't real, they are. Not because you haven't faced unfair situations, you have. But because that story is incomplete. It focuses on what happened to you and ignores the most important part: what you're going to do about it. And that's where your power lives. Not in the past, not in what others did or didn't do. In the choice you make right now, in this moment, to take full ownership of what comes next. In this audiobook, we're going to break down exactly why you've been stuck and what needs to change. We'll start by understanding why you blame in the first place. It's not because you're weak. It's because blame feels safe. It protects your ego. It explains away your pain, but it also keeps you stuck. Then we'll move into the victim mentality and how it's quietly destroying every area of your life. You'll learn to recognize it, confront it, and break free from it. From there, we'll talk about ownership. Real ownership. Not the kind where you beat yourself up for every mistake, but the kind where you recognize that every choice you make is shaping your future. We'll tackle the excuses that have been running your life. The "I don't have time" excuse. The "I'm not ready" excuse. The "it's too late" excuse. We'll break them down one by one and replace them with actions that actually move you forward. You'll learn how to build systems instead of relying on willpower. Because willpower runs out, but systems run forever. We'll face the hard truths you've been avoiding. The truth about where you are right now. The truth about the choices that got you here. This won't be comfortable. But comfort is what's been keeping you stuck. Growth happens on the other side of honesty. And finally, you'll learn how to protect your vision when the world tries to pull you back. Because the moment you start taking responsibility, everyone around you will test you. They'll question you. They'll doubt you. You'll learn how to stay strong, stay focused, and keep moving forward no matter what. This is your wake-up call. This is the moment where you decide, am I going to keep playing the victim, or am I going to become the victor? The choice is yours. It's always been yours. And once you truly understand that, once you stop waiting for permission and start taking action, everything changes. Your relationships change. Your career changes. Your confidence changes. Because you're no longer operating from a place of blame and helplessness. You're operating from a place of power and purpose. So one more time, are you ready? Are you ready to stop being a passenger and become the driver? Are you ready to stop blaming and start building? Because the journey starts right now. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop pointing fingers and start taking control. Every time you blame someone else for where you are, you're handing them control of your future. Think about that for a second. You're literally saying, my life depends on what they did, not on what I choose to do. And as long as that's your story, you're stuck. Let me tell you about a moment that changed everything for me. I watched a friend throw away 20 years of career progress by blaming everyone except himself. His boss was a jerk. The company was corrupt. The market was unfair. His team didn't support him. The industry had changed. The economy was bad. And you know what? He was probably right about some of it. Maybe even all of it. But here's the problem. Being right didn't change anything. He stayed angry, stayed stuck, and watched younger, less experienced people move past him. Not because they were better, not because they had more talent, but because they stopped blaming and started building. I remember sitting across from him at a coffee shop 5 years into his spiral. He was still complaining about the same boss, the same company, the same unfair circumstances. Nothing had changed except that he was 5 years older, 5 years more bitter, and 5 years further from his goals. That's when it hit me. Blame is not just unproductive, it's poisonous. It slowly destroys your ability to see opportunities, to take action, to believe in your own power to change things. That's the trap, isn't it? Blame feels so justified. It feels like truth. And sometimes it is truth. Sometimes people really do wrong you. Sometimes circumstances really are unfair. Sometimes you get dealt a terrible hand through absolutely no fault of your own. But blame only tells you what happened. It never tells you what to do next. It explains the past, but it paralyzes your future. Here's what nobody tells you about blame. It's not just about pointing fingers. It's about protection. Your brain uses blame as a shield to protect your ego from pain. When something goes wrong, your mind immediately searches for an external cause. Not because you're weak, not because you're immature, but because it hurts less to say, they failed me, than to say, I failed. That's human. That's normal. That's how we're wired. But it's also what's keeping you powerless. Think about the last time something went wrong in your life. Maybe a relationship ended. Maybe you didn't get the promotion you worked for. Maybe your business failed. Maybe you looked in the mirror one day and realized you're not where you thought you'd be at this age. What was your first thought? If you're honest, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself here, it probably went something like this. If only they had been more supportive. If only the timing had been better. If only I had more resources. Every sentence that starts with "if only" is just another way of saying, it's not my fault. And look, I get it. Sometimes it really isn't your fault. You didn't choose your childhood. You didn't create the economy. You didn't invent discrimination or bad luck or unfair systems. You didn't ask for the obstacles you faced. Those things are real. They shaped you. They limited you. They hurt you. But here's the brutal truth that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Fair or not, those external factors only explain your starting point. They don't determine your ending point. That's on you. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, somewhere in the world, there are two people in almost identical situations. Same challenges, same obstacles, same unfair circumstances. One has the same difficult childhood, the same lack of resources, the same systematic barriers that the other has. But one is moving forward and one is standing still. The only difference. One of them decided to stop asking, "Whose fault is this?" and started asking, "What can I control?" Because here's what happens when you blame. You give away your power. Every single time you point at someone else and say, "They're the reason I'm not succeeding," you're also saying, "I can't change this." You're saying, "My future depends on them changing, not me changing." You're saying, "I'm helpless," until they apologize, until they see they were wrong, until they make it right. And that's a gamble you'll always lose. Because you can't control them, you can't make them change, you can't force them to give you what you think you deserve. You can only control you. But it gets even more interesting. Blame doesn't just make you powerless. It makes you invisible to yourself. When you're focused on what they did wrong, you stop seeing what you could do differently. Your entire attention is on the past, on the injustice, on the story of how you got here. And while you're staring backward, life is moving forward without you. Opportunities pass by unnoticed. Solutions remain undiscovered. Growth becomes impossible. Because you can't build a future when all your energy is invested in prosecuting the past. I see this all the time. People who spend years, sometimes decades, blaming their ex for their trust issues, blaming their parents for their insecurities, blaming their boss for their stalled career, blaming the government for their financial struggles, blaming society for their lack of opportunities. And they're not wrong. Those people probably did hurt them. Those systems probably are unfair. But being hurt doesn't mean staying hurt. At some point, you have to decide, do I want to be right? Or do I want to be free? Because that's really what it comes down to. You can spend your whole life proving that it wasn't your fault. You can collect evidence. You can build an airtight case. You can get other people to validate your victimhood. You can be absolutely, undeniably, 100% right about who wronged you and how. But what does that get you? What prize do you win for being right? The answer is nothing. You get nothing except the bitter satisfaction of knowing that your failure to thrive can be blamed on someone else. So what's the alternative? Does taking responsibility mean pretending nothing bad happened? Does it mean excusing the people who hurt you? Does it mean telling yourself that it was all your fault when you know it wasn't? Absolutely not. Taking responsibility doesn't mean accepting blame for things that weren't your fault. It means accepting power over what happens next. It means saying, I don't control what happened to me, but I control what I do about it. And that shift, that single shift from they did this to me to what am I going to do about this, is where your freedom lives. Because suddenly, you're not waiting for an apology that may never come. You're not waiting for justice that may never arrive. You're not waiting for them to change, to see the light, to finally understand what they did wrong. You're moving. You're building. You're taking back control. You're no longer a passenger in your own life, hoping someone else will steer you toward happiness. You're behind the wheel. Here's your first step, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. For the next 24 hours, catch yourself every time you start to blame someone or something for where you are. Your boss, your ex, your parents, the economy, your age, your circumstances, your lack of education, your bad luck. Just notice it. Don't judge it. Don't beat yourself up for it. Just see it. Because you can't change what you don't see. And once you start seeing how often you give your power away, you'll start seeing something else. How much power you actually have. Because the truth is, you've always had it. You just handed it to everyone else because it felt safer to blame them than to take responsibility for what happens next. But safe is not the same as good. Safe is not the same as free. Safe is not the same as powerful. But knowing this isn't enough, because there's something deeper at play here. Something that makes blame feel not just justified, but necessary. And until you understand what that is, you'll keep falling back into the same pattern. So let me ask you this. What if the problem isn't just that you blame others? What if the problem is that you've built your entire identity around being the victim? Let's talk about that next. Chapter 2. The victim mentality is destroying your future. You can't be a victim and a victor at the same time. One of these identities will win. And right now, if you're honest with yourself, you know which one is winning. I'll never forget sitting in a coffee shop 3 years ago, watching a woman I'll call Sarah completely unravel over a situation at work. Her boss had passed her over for a promotion, again. And for 30 minutes straight, she listed every reason why it wasn't fair. The company was corrupt. Her boss played favorites. The younger employees didn't work as hard. Her coworkers didn't appreciate her. The system was rigged. And here's what struck me. She was probably right about some of it, maybe even all of it. But as I listened to her, I realized something sad. Sarah had been telling me variations of this exact story for 5 years. Different job, different boss, same narrative. She was always the victim, always wronged, always overlooked. And she was still stuck in the same position, in the same mindset, living the same frustrated life. That's when I understood. Victim mentality doesn't look like what most people think. It doesn't look like someone lying in bed all day feeling sorry for themselves. It looks like Sarah, hardworking, intelligent, sincere, but completely trapped in a story about why she couldn't win. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Victim mentality doesn't always announce itself. You probably imagine someone who constantly complains, who refuses to take any responsibility, who wallows in self-pity all day long. And sure, that's the extreme version. But most people with a victim mentality don't even realize they have it. They think they're just being realistic. They think they're just acknowledging the obstacles. They think they're just telling the truth about how hard things are. But there's a difference between acknowledging reality and using reality as an excuse. There's a difference between saying, "This is difficult," and saying, "This is impossible." There's a difference between recognizing obstacles and worshiping them. I learned this the hard way when I spent 2 years blaming my childhood for every problem in my adult life. And look, my childhood was difficult. The trauma was real. The challenges were legitimate. But 2 years of blame didn't heal me. 2 years of explaining to anyone who would listen why I was the way I was didn't move me forward 1 inch. What changed everything was the day I realized I could keep being right about what happened to me, or I could start being powerful about what happened next. Let me tell you what victim mentality really looks like. It looks like someone who works hard but always has a reason why the results aren't their fault. It looks like someone who has big dreams, but a bigger list of reasons why those dreams are out of reach. It looks like someone who knows exactly what they need to do, but can always explain why now isn't the right time. It's subtle. It's sophisticated. It hides behind logic and reasonable-sounding excuses. But it's still giving away your power. Think about the last time something went wrong in your life. Maybe a relationship ended. Maybe you didn't get the promotion you worked for. Maybe your business failed. Maybe you looked in the mirror one day and realized you're not where you thought you'd be at this age. What was your first thought? If you're honest, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself here, it probably went something like this. If only they had been more supportive. If only the timing had been better. If only I had more resources. Every sentence that starts with "if only" is just another way of saying, it's not my fault. And here's why it's so dangerous. Victim mentality feels like safety. It feels like protection. When you're the victim, you can't be blamed. When you're the victim, you get sympathy. When you're the victim, people lower their expectations of you. And honestly, that can feel like relief. Because if no one expects anything from you, you can't fail. You can't disappoint. You can't be judged. But here's what you trade for that safety. Your future, your potential, your power, your freedom. You trade everything you could become for the comfort of not being responsible for who you are. I want you to imagine 2 people facing the same setback. Let's say they both get laid off from their jobs on the same day. Same company. Same circumstances. Same severance package. I watched this happen with 2 colleagues once. 6 months later, one of them had started his own consulting business and was earning more than he ever had as an employee. The other was still unemployed, still angry, still telling everyone who would listen about how unfair the whole thing was. What's the difference? The difference is not intelligence. It's not connections. It's not luck. The difference is that one of them asked, "What can I control?" And the other asked, "Who can I blame?" One of them saw an obstacle and looked for a path around it. The other saw an obstacle and used it as proof that the world was against them. And here's the thing about victim mentality. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you believe the world is against you, you start seeing evidence of it everywhere. You interpret neutral events as attacks. You see obstacles as conspiracies. You turn setbacks into proof that you were right all along. But here's what gives me hope. Here's what I've seen change people's lives. The moment you realize that victim mentality is a choice, you also realize you can make a different choice. You can choose to be a victor instead. Not because victors never face obstacles, but because victors don't let obstacles define them. So how do you know if you're stuck in victim mentality? Let me give you some signs. First, you find yourself constantly explaining why things aren't your fault. Second, you spend more time talking about problems than taking action on solutions. Third, you feel secretly satisfied when things go wrong because it proves you were right to be pessimistic. Fourth, You get defensive when someone suggests you have more control than you're admitting. Fifth, you find yourself saying, "I tried that," or "that won't work for me," before you've actually given anything a real chance. If any of those hit home, that's okay. Awareness is the first step. You can't change what you can't see. But now that you see it, now that you recognize the pattern, you have a choice. Here's your challenge for this chapter. For the next 3 days, pay attention to your language. Listen to how you talk about your life, your circumstances, your challenges. Count how many times you use the word can't. Count how many times you explain why something isn't your fault. Count how many times you talk about what's wrong versus what you're doing about it. Don't judge yourself, just notice. Because the victim mentality will fight to stay alive. It will give you 1,000 reasons why taking responsibility is unfair, why you're different, why your circumstances are special. But those are just fear dressed up as logic. Don't fall for it. Because here's what's waiting on the other side of victim mentality. Freedom. Real, genuine freedom. The freedom to try and fail without it meaning anything about you. The freedom to succeed without having to share the credit. The freedom to control your own narrative instead of being a character in someone else's story. But freedom isn't free. It costs you the comfort of excuses. It costs you the safety of blame. It costs you the sympathy you get from being powerless. Are you willing to pay that price? Because if you are, everything changes. And I mean everything. Let me show you what that looks like in the next chapter. Chapter 3. Own your choices. Own your life. Your life today is the sum of your choices yesterday, not your circumstances, not your luck, not what other people did or didn't do. Your choices. Every single decision you've made. What to focus on, what to ignore, what to pursue, what to abandon, what to tolerate, what to change, has brought you to exactly where you are right now. And that's either the most terrifying thing you've ever heard, or the most liberating. Because if your choices created your current reality, then different choices can create a different reality. I remember the exact moment this hit me. I was sitting in a financial advisor's office, looking at my bank statement, and I felt this wave of anger. The economy is rigged, I thought. My generation got screwed. And maybe there was some truth to that. But as I sat there preparing my list of complaints, the advisor asked me a simple question. How much did you spend on entertainment last month? I didn't want to answer. Because I knew. $300 on streaming services, video games, concerts I barely remembered. Not because I was rich, but because in every moment of choice between saving for my future and consuming in the present, I chose consumption. Every single time. That wasn't the economy's fault. That was mine. And admitting that felt like swallowing glass. But it also gave me something I hadn't had before. Power. Because if I created the problem, I could create the solution. Here's what nobody tells you about ownership. It doesn't mean beating yourself up. It doesn't mean carrying shame for every mistake. It doesn't mean pretending you haven't faced real obstacles or real injustice. Ownership means something much simpler and much more powerful. Recognizing that regardless of how you got here, you're the only one who can decide where you go next. Think about Oprah Winfrey for a second. She wasn't sitting around blaming the poverty, the abuse, the discrimination she faced as a black woman in America. Were those things real? Absolutely. Were they unfair? Without question. But she took those experiences and turned them into her power. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because she refused to let it write her future. She said yes to ownership when everything in her past gave her permission to say no. That's what real ownership looks like. It's not denying what happened. It's refusing to be defined by it. But let's get practical. Because ownership isn't just a mindset. It's a practice. It's a muscle you build, one decision at a time. And like any muscle, it's weak at first. It hurts to use. You want to quit. But the more you practice it, the stronger it gets. I learned this from watching my neighbor transform his life in his mid-50s. He'd spent 20 years blaming his ex-wife for his financial problems. And maybe she did make some bad decisions during their marriage. But 20 years later, he was still broke, still angry, still waiting for justice that was never coming. Then something shifted. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe he just got tired of his own story. But he stopped talking about what she did and started talking about what he was going to do. He took a second job, not because he wanted to, because his future mattered more than his comfort. He sold the house he couldn't afford and moved into a small apartment, not because it was fair. Because ownership isn't about fair, it's about effective. Within 3 years, he'd paid off his debt, started a small business, and met someone new. Same guy, same starting point, different choices. That's the thing about ownership. It doesn't change what happened yesterday, but it completely changes what happens tomorrow. So how do you practice ownership? How do you build this muscle when you've spent years letting it atrophy? Let me give you 3 concrete steps. First, stop using the word fault and start using the word responsibility. Fault looks backward. It asks, who caused this? Responsibility looks forward. It asks, who's going to solve this? Most of the time, the answer to those 2 questions is different. And that's okay. Someone else might have caused your problem, but you're the one who has to solve it. That's not fair. That's just reality. Second, catch yourself every time you say, I can't. 9 times out of 10, what you really mean is, I won't, or I don't want to, or I'm scared to. And that's honest. That's real. But it's also a choice. When you say I can't, you're pretending you don't have a choice. When you say I won't, or I'm choosing not to, you acknowledge your power. And acknowledging your power is the first step to using it. Third, take one small action every day that proves to yourself that you're in control. Not a big action, not a life-changing action. Just one small thing that demonstrates ownership. Reply to that email you've been avoiding. Make that phone call you've been putting off. Save $10 instead of spending it. The size doesn't matter. The pattern does. Because every time you choose ownership, you're telling yourself a new story about who you are. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to take ownership of everything all at once. They wake up one morning and decide they're going to fix their entire life by Friday. And by Monday, they're exhausted and back to their old patterns. Because ownership isn't about perfection. It's about direction. You're not trying to own everything. You're trying to own something. One decision, one area, one choice at a time. Maybe today you take ownership of your health, tomorrow your finances, next week your relationships. Small steps, consistent steps. That's how you build a life you're proud of. I think about the woman I met at a conference last year. She'd spent 15 years in a job she hated, blaming her boss for not promoting her. Then one day she realized her boss wasn't keeping her there. Fear was. Fear of the unknown. Fear of failing. Fear of trying something new and discovering she wasn't as good as she thought. So she owned that fear. She didn't eliminate it. She just stopped letting it make her decisions. She quit. Started her own consulting business. The first year was brutal. She made less money than ever, worked longer hours, doubted herself constantly. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years, alive. Because she was finally the author of her own story, instead of a character in someone else's. That's what ownership gives you. Not an easy life, not a perfect life, but a life that's truly yours. Here's your challenge for this chapter. Choose one area of your life where you've been avoiding ownership. Just one. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's a relationship that's falling apart. Pick the area that makes you most uncomfortable when you think about it. That's the one. Now ask yourself this question. If I were 100% responsible for improving this area of my life, what would I do today? Not tomorrow. Not someday. Today. Write down your answer. And then do it. Just one thing. One choice that proves to yourself that you're in control. Because that's all ownership is. A series of small choices that add up to a completely different life. But I need to warn you about something. The moment you start taking real ownership, the moment you stop blaming and start building, people around you are going to notice. And some of them aren't going to like it. Some of them are going to try to pull you back. Not because they're bad people, but because your growth threatens their excuses. Let me explain what I mean in the next chapter. Chapter 5. Your excuses are costing you everything. Excuses feel like explanations, but they're really just fear dressed up in logic. You know the ones. I don't have time. I don't have money. I'm too old. I'm not ready. The timing isn't right. I don't have the right connections. I don't have the skills. They sound reasonable. They sound like facts. But here's what they really are. Permission slips to stay exactly where you are. And every time you use one, you're not protecting yourself from failure. You're guaranteeing it. Let me tell you about someone who spent 7 years saying she didn't have time to start her business. She had a full-time job, 2 kids, aging parents who needed care, and a house that always seemed to need something fixed. Her life was legitimately busy. The excuse was legitimate. But 7 years later, she was still talking about the same dream, still waiting for time to magically appear, still frustrated that nothing was changing. Then something happened. Her company downsized. She lost her job. Suddenly, she had all the time in the world. And you know what? She still didn't start her business. Because it was never really about time. It was about fear. And when the "I don't have time" excuse disappeared, a new one appeared. The economy is too unstable. Then another, I should wait until I have more savings. The excuses changed, but the pattern stayed the same. That's how excuses work. They're not actually about the thing you say they're about. They're shields. They protect you from having to admit the real reason you're not moving forward. You're scared. Scared of failing. Scared of succeeding. Scared of being judged. Scared of discovering you're not as capable as you thought. Scared of the unknown. And fear is honest. Fear is real. But excuses are lies we tell ourselves to avoid facing the fear. Here's what most people don't understand. Every excuse has a cost. Not someday. Right now. Every time you say, I can't afford to start that business, you're paying the cost of never knowing what could have been. Every time you say, I'm too old to change careers, you're paying the cost of spending the next 20 years in a job that drains you. Every time you say, I don't have time to take care of my health, you're paying the cost with your body, your energy, your future. The question isn't whether you can afford to take the risk. The question is whether you can afford not to. Let me break down the 5 most common excuses that keep people stuck. And more importantly, let me show you what they're really costing you. Excuse number 1. I don't have time. This is the most popular excuse because it sounds so reasonable. Who isn't busy? Who doesn't have a million things demanding their attention? But here's the uncomfortable truth. You have time for what you prioritize. You find time for what matters. And right now, your excuses matter more than your dreams. There was a man who spent years saying he didn't have time to write. He worked full-time, had a family, had commitments. Then someone challenged him. Track your time for 1 week. Every hour, see where it actually goes. He did. And what he discovered shocked him. 3 hours a day on social media. 2 hours a day watching TV. An hour a day on activities he didn't even enjoy but did out of habit. He didn't have a time problem. He had a priority problem. Within 6 months of cutting out the time wasters and repurposing that time toward his writing, he'd finished his first manuscript. Same job, same family, same 24 hours in a day. Different choices. What this excuse is costing you. Years of your life spent on things that don't matter while your dreams die in the waiting room. Excuse number 2. I don't have money. Money is the second most popular excuse because it feels like a hard boundary. You can't start a business without capital, right? You can't invest in your education without tuition. You can't make changes without resources. But here's what actually happens. People who don't have money find ways. People who have excuses find reasons why the ways won't work. Think about someone who wanted to become a personal trainer but said they couldn't afford certification. Meanwhile, they spent $60 a month on a gym membership they barely used, $100 a month on supplements, and another $100 on streaming services. That's $260 a month. In 6 months, that's $1,560, enough for most certifications. They didn't have a money problem. They had a priorities problem disguised as a money problem. What this excuse is costing you. The opportunity to build wealth, freedom, and independence, while you wait for someone to hand you the resources you already have. Excuse number 3. I'm too old. This excuse is particularly painful because it comes with a sense of finality. If you're too old, then it's not your fault for not trying. It's just biology, right? Wrong. Think about Vera Wang. She entered the fashion industry at 40. Julia Child wrote her first cookbook at 50. Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first Little House book at 65. Colonel Sanders started KFC at 62. These aren't exceptions. They're proof that the only thing age really limits is the number of excuses you can use. There was a woman who spent her 50s saying she was too old to go back to school. Then, at 61, her husband died suddenly. And in the grief and chaos of rebuilding her life, she realized something. She'd rather spend her remaining years learning and growing than regretting and wondering. She enrolled in college, got her degree at 65, started a new career at 66. She's now 72, more fulfilled than she's ever been, and her biggest regret is all the years she wasted believing the excuse. What this excuse is costing you. The second half of your life, the years that could have been your most meaningful, your most free, your most authentic. Excuse number 4. I'm not ready. This is the perfectionist's excuse. It sounds responsible. It sounds like wisdom, but it's neither. It's procrastination wearing a suit and tie. You're never going to feel ready, ever. Not for starting a business, not for having a difficult conversation, not for making a big change. Readiness is not a feeling you wait for. It's a decision you make, despite the fear. Someone once spent 3 years preparing to launch a podcast. He researched equipment, took courses, wrote outlines, practiced alone in his room. 3 years. and he still didn't feel ready. Then he watched someone else launch a podcast with a phone and a free app. The quality was mediocre. The content was okay. But it existed. And over time, it improved. Because the person didn't wait to be ready. They got ready by doing. What this excuse is costing you. The learning that only comes from action. The growth that only comes from mistakes. The momentum that only comes from starting. Excuse number 5. The timing isn't right. This is the excuse that sounds the most logical. Of course, timing matters, right? But here's the truth. The timing is never right. There's always a reason to wait. Always a better moment just around the corner. Always something that would make it easier if it would just happen first. But perfect timing is a myth. The people who wait for it never start. The people who start create their own timing. Someone waited to leave a toxic relationship until the right time. Until finances were better. Until the kids were older. Until work was less stressful. Until 10 years passed. The right time never came. Because when you're looking for reasons to wait, you'll always find them. What this excuse is costing you, today and tomorrow. And every day you spend waiting for permission from circumstances that will never align perfectly. Here's your challenge for this chapter, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Write down the 3 biggest excuses you use. The ones that feel the most legitimate, the most justified, the most true. Write them down honestly. Now, next to each one, write what it's costing you. Not someday. Right now. What are you giving up by believing this excuse? What are you not becoming? What are you not experiencing? What are you not building? And then ask yourself this question. Is this excuse worth what it's costing me? Because the truth is, you can have your excuses, or you can have your dreams, but you can't have both. Every minute you spend defending why you can't is a minute you're not spending figuring out how you can. Here's your challenge for this chapter, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Write down the 3 biggest excuses you use. The ones that feel the most legitimate, the most justified, the most true. Write them down honestly. Now, next to each one, write what it's costing you. Not someday. Right now. What are you giving up by believing this excuse? What are you not becoming? What are you not experiencing? What are you not building? And then ask yourself this question. Is this excuse worth what it's costing me? Because the truth is, you can have your excuses, or you can have your dreams, but you can't have both. Every minute you spend defending why you can't is a minute you're not spending figuring out how you can. Choose one excuse. Just one. The biggest one. The one that's cost you the most. And destroy it today. Take one action, no matter how small, that proves that excuse was never real. Call the person you've been avoiding. Sign up for the course. Start the project. Make the change. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait for fear to disappear. Act despite it. Because on the other side of that excuse is the life you've been dreaming about. Go get it. Chapter 6. Build systems that make success inevitable. You don't need more discipline. You need better systems. Most people think success is about willpower, about grinding harder, about finding the motivation to push through when things get tough. But here's what they don't understand. Willpower is a resource that runs out. Motivation is a feeling that comes and goes. And grinding yourself into exhaustion isn't a strategy. It's a shortcut to burnout. Systems, on the other hand, don't require willpower. They don't depend on motivation. They work whether you feel like it or not. Because a good system makes the right choice automatic and the wrong choice difficult. Let me show you what I mean. There was someone who spent years trying to get healthy. Every January, the same resolution: lose weight, eat better, exercise more. And every January, the same burst of motivation: gym membership, meal prep containers, new running shoes. For 2 weeks, maybe 3, it worked. Then life got busy. Motivation faded, willpower depleted, and by February, it was over. Back to the old habits, back to the same frustration. This cycle repeated for 8 years. 8 years of trying and failing, trying and failing. And the entire time, this person thought the problem was discipline. I just need to be stronger. I just need to want it more. But that wasn't the problem at all. The problem was the system, or rather, the lack of one. Here's what changed. Instead of relying on motivation to go to the gym, this person built a system that made going to the gym the path of least resistance. They joined a gym 2 minutes from their office. They kept a gym bag in their car, always packed and ready. They scheduled workouts at the same time every day, like a doctor's appointment that couldn't be moved. And here's the key. They made the workouts ridiculously short. 15 minutes. That's it. Not because 15 minutes is optimal, but because the barrier to starting was so low that excuses couldn't take hold. And once they were there, once they'd started, they usually did more. But even if they didn't, they'd still shown up. The system worked whether motivation showed up or not. Within a year, they'd lost 40 pounds. Not through discipline, through design. That's the power of systems. They remove the moment of decision, the moment where willpower is required, and replace it with automation. You're not fighting yourself every day. You're not negotiating with your excuses. You're just following the path you already designed. But here's what most people get wrong. They try to build perfect systems, complex systems, systems that require them to be a different person than they actually are. And then they wonder why the systems fail. Good systems aren't complicated. They're stupidly simple. They're so easy that you can't fail, and so consistent that results become inevitable. Think about someone who wanted to write a book. Every night they'd sit down with the intention of writing. Sometimes they'd write 1,000 words, sometimes nothing. It depended on inspiration, on energy, on whether they'd had a good day or a bad day. And over the course of a year, they'd written maybe 20,000 words, disjointed, scattered, incomplete. Then they changed the system. Instead of write when inspired, they set a timer for 20 minutes every morning. Same time, same place. 20 minutes of writing, no matter what. Not a word count goal, not a quality standard. Just 20 minutes. Some days, those 20 minutes produced garbage. Some days, gold. But every day they wrote. And at the end of a year, they had a finished manuscript. Not because they found more inspiration, because the system didn't require it. Here's the thing about systems. They're not about doing more. They're about removing friction from the things that matter and adding friction to the things that don't. Want to eat healthier? Don't rely on willpower to resist junk food. Build a system where junk food isn't in your house. Want to save money? Don't rely on discipline to set aside cash at the end of the month. Build a system where money automatically transfers to savings before you ever see it. Want to build a business? Don't rely on motivation to work on it after your day job. Build a system where you work on it at the same time every day before anything else demands your attention. The people who succeed aren't the ones with the most willpower. They're the ones who've designed their lives so that success is the default outcome. There was a couple who wanted to get out of debt. They'd tried everything. Budgets, apps, accountability partners. Nothing stuck. Because at the end of every month, there were always unexpected expenses. Always something that threw off the plan. And every time, they felt like failures. Then they tried something different. They didn't create a budget. They created a system. They set up separate bank accounts, one for bills, one for savings, one for spending. On payday, money automatically split between them. Bills account got what was needed for rent, utilities, insurance. Savings account got 20%. Everything left over went to spending. The system wasn't perfect. Some months the spending account ran low. But they never missed a bill. Never skipped savings. Because the system handled it before they had a chance to make a decision. Within 3 years, they were debt-free. Same income, same expenses, different system. That's what systems do. They turn vague intentions into automatic behaviors. They turn someday goals into daily reality. They make success so inevitable that failure becomes the harder option. So what does a good system look like? It has 3 characteristics. First, it's simple. If your system requires willpower, discipline, or remembering 17 steps, it's not a system. It's a wish. Good systems are so simple that you can do them when you're exhausted, distracted, or unmotivated. Second, it's consistent. Systems work because they remove variability. Same time, same place, same trigger. Your brain stops seeing it as a choice and starts seeing it as just what happens next. Third, it's designed for your actual life, not your ideal life. Don't build a system that requires you to wake up at 5 a.m. if you're not a morning person. Don't build a system that requires an hour of focus if you only have 30-minute windows. Build systems that fit the life you actually have, not the life you wish you had. And here's the beautiful part. Once a system is working, you can optimize it. Make it better, make it bigger. But you can't optimize what doesn't exist. Start simple. Start small. Start with one system in one area of your life. Because here's the truth. Motivation gets you started. Systems keep you going. Discipline gets you through the tough days. But systems eliminate most of the tough days entirely. You don't need to be a different person. You don't need more willpower or more motivation or more time. You just need to design your life so that the person you already are can win. That's what systems do. They make success inevitable instead of optional. Stop relying on the version of yourself that shows up on your best days. Build systems for the version of yourself that shows up on your worst days. Because that's the version that determines whether you succeed or quit. And when your systems are strong enough, even your worst days move you forward. Chapter 7. Face the truth about where you are right now. You can't change what you refuse to see. Most people spend their lives in a state of comfortable delusion, not because they're stupid or weak, but because facing the truth about where you actually are is terrifying. It's easier to tell yourself you're doing okay than to admit you're 30 pounds overweight. It's easier to say your marriage is going through a rough patch than to acknowledge it's been broken for years. It's easier to believe you're just waiting for the right opportunity than to face the fact that you've been hiding from risk. But here's the uncomfortable reality. You can't build a better future on top of a dishonest present. Every day you spend pretending things are fine when they're not is a day you're not fixing them. And the gap between where you pretend to be and where you actually are, that gap is costing you everything. There was someone who believed they were financially responsible. They had a good job, paid their bills on time, never missed a mortgage payment. On the surface, everything looked fine. But they never looked beneath the surface, never added up the credit card balances, never calculated how much they were actually spending versus earning. never faced the truth that they were living paycheck to paycheck with no savings and $40,000 in debt. It took a medical emergency, an unexpected hospital bill they couldn't pay, to force them to finally look. And what they saw shocked them. Not because the numbers were different than they expected, but because they'd been actively avoiding knowing them. They'd built an entire life on the foundation of, "I think I'm okay," instead of, "I know exactly where I stand." That moment of truth was painful, embarrassing, overwhelming. But it was also the moment everything changed, because once they saw the truth, they could finally do something about it. Within 3 years, they were debt-free, not because they got a windfall or a raise, but because they stopped lying to themselves about where they were starting from. That's what truth does. It doesn't make things easier. It makes progress possible. Here's what happens when you refuse to face the truth. You make plans based on fantasy. You set goals from a starting point that doesn't exist. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes because you haven't admitted what today actually looks like. Think about someone who wanted to get in shape but refused to step on a scale. "I don't need a number to tell me how I feel," they'd say. And that sounds empowering, right? Except they didn't know if they were making progress, didn't know if their efforts were working, didn't know if they needed to change their approach. They were working blind. And after 6 months of trying, they looked exactly the same. Not because their efforts didn't matter, but because without truth, they couldn't measure whether those efforts were enough. The truth isn't cruel. Avoiding it is. But here's why facing the truth is so hard. It requires you to drop the story you've been telling yourself. The story about why things are the way they are. The story about how it's not really your fault. The story about how you're doing better than you actually are. And those stories? They're comfortable. They protect your ego. They let you sleep at night. But they also keep you stuck. There was a man who spent 15 years telling himself he was happy in his career. Good company, decent salary, stable, safe. But every Sunday night, he'd get this sinking feeling in his stomach. Every Monday morning, he'd hit snooze 3 times before dragging himself out of bed. Every performance review, he'd nod along while feeling absolutely nothing. For 15 years, he told himself, this is just what work feels like. Everyone hates Mondays. Then he met someone at a conference who talked about their work with genuine excitement, not fake corporate enthusiasm, real passion. And it hit him. He'd been lying to himself for 15 years. He wasn't happy. He was numb. He'd mistaken the absence of catastrophe for the presence of fulfillment. Facing that truth was brutal. It meant admitting he'd wasted 15 years. It meant acknowledging that all the reasons he'd given for staying, stability, benefits, retirement, were just excuses to avoid the fear of change. It meant looking at his life and saying, this isn't working, and it hasn't been working for a long time. But that moment of truth also gave him clarity. Within a year, he'd transitioned to a new field, took a pay cut, started over, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt alive. Not because the new job was perfect, but because he was finally living in truth instead of hiding in comfort. So how do you face the truth when you've spent years avoiding it? You start with radical honesty. Not honesty that sounds good. Honesty that hurts. Look at your relationships. Are they actually healthy, or are you just used to them? Look at your health. Are you actually taking care of yourself, or are you just not sick yet? Look at your career. Are you actually growing, or are you just surviving? Look at your finances. Do you actually know where your money goes, or are you just hoping it works out? The answers to these questions might hurt. But avoiding them hurts more. Because every day you live in denial is a day you can't fix what's broken. There was a woman who refused to face the truth about her marriage. Her husband hadn't touched her in 2 years. They barely spoke unless it was about logistics. Who's picking up the kids? What's for dinner? Did you pay the electric bill? They lived like roommates, not partners. But she kept telling herself, "We're just busy. Things will get better when life calms down." But life never calms down. And things don't get better when you're pretending they're fine. It took a friend asking a simple question, "Are you happy?" for the truth to finally surface. And the answer was no. She wasn't happy. She hadn't been happy in years. And once she admitted that, once she faced the truth, she had a choice: stay and fix it, or leave and rebuild. Either way, the truth gave her agency. As long as she pretended everything was fine, she had no power. The truth was painful, but it was also the only path to freedom. Here's what truth does. It eliminates the middle ground. You can't stay in comfortable delusion once you've seen reality. You either act or you consciously choose not to act. But you can no longer hide behind, "I didn't know," or "I thought it was fine." And that's terrifying. Because truth demands a response. It demands that you either fix what's broken or accept that you're choosing to live with it, broken. But here's what most people miss. The truth also eliminates the exhaustion of pretending. When you're living in denial, you're constantly managing 2 realities: the one you tell yourself and the one that actually exists. And that management is exhausting. It drains your energy. It clouds your judgment. It keeps you stuck in a loop of knowing something's wrong but not admitting what. When you face the truth, you stop managing the gap. You stop spinning the story. You stop defending the delusion. And suddenly, all that energy you were using to maintain the lie, it's available for fixing the problem. So face the truth. All of it. Not just the easy parts, the hard parts, the embarrassing parts, the parts that make you question the last 5, 10, 20 years of choices. Because you can't change direction if you don't know where you're actually standing. And you can't build something real on a foundation of lies. The truth won't destroy you, but avoiding it will. Because every day you spend pretending is a day you're not growing, not healing, not moving forward. And time doesn't wait for you to get comfortable with reality. It just keeps moving. The question is whether you'll move with it or stay frozen in denial. Face the truth, whatever it is, wherever you are, no matter how far it is from where you thought you'd be. Because the truth is the only place transformation can begin. Chapter 8. Take action before you feel ready. Readiness is not a feeling. It's a decision. You're waiting to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel like you have all the answers, all the skills, all the certainty you need before you take the first step. And that waiting? It's the reason you're still standing in the same place you were a year ago, 5 years ago, maybe longer. Here's what nobody tells you. You will never feel ready. Not for starting a business, not for having that difficult conversation, not for making a major life change, not for anything that actually matters. Because readiness doesn't come from thinking about it. It comes from doing it. The people you admire, the ones who've built something, changed something, become something. They didn't wait until they felt ready. They felt exactly like you feel right now. Scared, uncertain, underprepared. The only difference is they moved anyway. Think about the first time you drove a car. You weren't ready. You couldn't possibly be. No amount of reading about driving, watching others drive, or sitting in the passenger seat could prepare you for the moment your hands were on the wheel and the car was actually moving. But you did it anyway. And the only way you learned to drive was by driving badly at first and getting better through repetition. That's how everything works. You don't get ready and then act. You act and then get ready. But we've been taught the opposite. We've been conditioned to believe that preparation equals safety. That if we just study a little more, plan a little more, wait for the right moment a little longer, we'll somehow arrive at this magical state of readiness where action feels easy and failure feels impossible. That moment doesn't exist. And waiting for it is just fear wearing the mask of wisdom. There was someone who wanted to start a business. Not someday, actually wanted to start, had the idea, had the passion, had the market research, but didn't feel ready. So they took more courses, read more books, attended more seminars. 3 years. 3 years of getting ready. And at the end of those 3 years, they still didn't feel ready. Because readiness wasn't the problem. Fear was. Meanwhile, someone else with half the knowledge and twice the courage launched their business in 3 months, made mistakes, lost money, looked foolish. But they were in the game, and every mistake taught them something no course could. Within a year, they were profitable. Not because they were smarter, because they were willing to be bad at something long enough to get good at it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Action creates clarity, not the other way around. You think you need clarity before you can act. But clarity comes from acting, from trying, failing, adjusting, trying again, from getting messy and imperfect feedback that shows you what actually works versus what you thought would work. Let me tell you a story. There was a piano teacher, an older teacher, someone who'd spent decades working with students of all ages and abilities. And she had a student, a woman in her early 50s, who'd been taking lessons for almost 2 years. This student could play beautifully in the privacy of her lessons. Technically sound, emotionally expressive. But she refused to perform for anyone, not even family. Every time the teacher suggested a small recital, just other students, nothing formal, the student would tense up and say, "I'm not ready yet. Maybe after a few more months." The teacher tried everything: encouragement, smaller audiences, more preparation time. Nothing worked. The student stayed stuck in this loop of perpetual preparation, always improving but never performing. Then one day, the teacher stopped pushing. Instead, she told the student about planting tomatoes. "You know," she said, "when you plant a tomato seedling, it looks so fragile. Tiny stem, few leaves, not ready for the world. And if you keep it in the greenhouse, waiting for it to look strong enough to survive outside, you'll wait forever. Because the only way it gets strong is by facing the wind, the rain, the sun. It doesn't get ready in the greenhouse. It gets ready by being planted." The student didn't respond right away. But 3 weeks later, she told the teacher she'd signed up for a small community recital. "I realized," she said, "that I wasn't waiting to be ready. I was waiting to be perfect. And that was never going to happen." She played at the recital. Her hands shook. She missed a few notes. But she played. And afterward, she cried. Not because it went perfectly, but because she'd finally done the things she'd been terrified to do for 2 years. And the world didn't end. She didn't crumble. She just grew. That's what action does. It doesn't guarantee success. It guarantees growth. And growth is what builds the person who's actually capable of succeeding. So why do we wait? Because we've confused preparation with protection. We tell ourselves we're being responsible, strategic, smart. But what we're really doing is avoiding the vulnerability of being seen before we're perfect, avoiding the risk of failing, avoiding the discomfort of being a beginner. But here's what happens when you wait. Nothing. Nothing happens. You don't get better at the thing by thinking about it. You don't gain confidence by waiting. You don't build the life you want by preparing to build it. You just get older. More knowledgeable, maybe. But not more alive. There was someone who wanted to write a book for 15 years. 15 years of, I'll start when I have more time. I'll start when I know what I'm doing. I'll start when I have something important to say. And every year that passed, the gap between who they were and who they wanted to be got wider, until one day they met someone at a bookstore, a published author signing copies of a mediocre book, and they realized this person wasn't more talented, wasn't more prepared. They just did it. They were willing to write a mediocre book and get better, while this person was still waiting to write a perfect one that would never exist. That realization hurt, but it also freed them. Within 6 months, they'd written their first draft. Was it good? No. Was it done? Yes. And done beats perfect every time. Here's what you need to understand. The version of you that's ready doesn't exist yet. You don't become that person by waiting. You become that person by acting before you're ready, learning from the mess, and repeating until you are ready. Readiness is the result of action, not the requirement for it. So what are you waiting for? What's the thing you've been telling yourself you'll do when you're ready? Start that business. Have that conversation. Apply for that job. End that relationship. Begin that project. Whatever it is, you already know what it is. You've known for a long time. Here's your challenge. Pick one thing, just one. The thing you've been preparing for, planning for, waiting to feel ready for. And do one small, imperfect, terrifying step toward it today. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Today. Write the first paragraph of that book. Send the first email about that business. Make the first call to that person. Sign up for that class. Submit that application. Whatever the first step is, take it. Messy, imperfect, scared, take it anyway. Because the truth is, you're as ready as you'll ever be. Not because you have all the skills or answers or confidence, but because readiness is a myth. And the only way to become the person capable of doing the thing is to do the thing. You don't need more time. You don't need more knowledge. You don't need more preparation. You need courage. The courage to start before you're ready. The courage to be bad at something in public. The courage to fail, learn, and try again. Need courage? You already have it. You just need to use it. Today. Chapter 9. Protect your vision from outside noise. The moment you start changing, the people around you will try to stop you. Not because they're cruel, but because your transformation threatens their comfort. When you decide to take ownership of your life, to stop blaming and start building, to move towards something better, the resistance won't always come from inside you. Sometimes it comes from the people closest to you, family, friends, colleagues. The ones who claim they want you to succeed, but somehow always find a reason why now isn't the right time, why your idea won't work, why you should wait just a little longer. They don't do this out of malice, at least not consciously. They do it because your growth forces them to confront their own stagnation. Your willingness to take risks makes their excuses look like what they are. Excuses. Your movement forward highlights their standing still. And that discomfort, that cognitive dissonance, gets redirected at you as concern. as advice, as well-intentioned warnings designed to keep you exactly where you are. Lisa had worked in corporate finance for 23 years when she decided she wanted to become a therapist. Not as a side hobby, not eventually, but actually transition careers entirely. She was 47, and she'd finally admitted to herself that analyzing spreadsheets for the rest of her life felt like a slow death. So she enrolled in evening classes while still working her day job, started the licensing process, began building towards something she actually cared about. And the moment she told her family, the pushback began. Subtle at first, then increasingly direct. That's a pretty significant pay cut, isn't it? Her father asked during dinner, his voice carefully neutral in that way that meant he'd already decided what the right answer should be. I mean, do you really want to start over at your age? Her husband worried about the mortgage, the kids' college funds, the stability they'd worked so hard to build. Her colleagues at work made jokes about midlife crises, about throwing away a perfectly good career, about how tough the therapy market was these days. Every conversation became a subtle negotiation, a gentle pressure to reconsider, to be realistic, to think about everyone else who depended on her. None of these people were trying to hurt Lisa, at least not intentionally. They were trying to protect themselves from the discomfort of watching someone they knew step outside the boundaries of what felt safe and predictable. Because if Lisa could change her entire career at 47, what did that say about everyone else who'd stayed in jobs they didn't love, who'd prioritized security over fulfillment, who'd convinced themselves that this was just what responsible adults did? This is what happens when you start living differently. Not everyone celebrates it. Some people will actively discourage you, others will passively undermine you, and a few will quietly distance themselves because your new path makes them uncomfortable with their own choices. But understanding why they do it doesn't mean you have to let it stop you. Compassion for their fear doesn't require abandoning your vision. You can love someone and still refuse to let their limitations become yours. So how do you protect your vision when everyone around you seems invested in keeping you small? You start by recognizing that their resistance isn't about you. It's about them. When someone tells you your dream is unrealistic, they're really saying it feels unrealistic for them. When they warn you about failure, they're projecting their own fear onto your future. When they insist you need to be practical, they're defending the practical choices that have left them unfulfilled. Once you see this clearly, their words lose their power over you, not because you stop caring about these people, but because you stop confusing their fear with wisdom, their comfort with your calling. Robert wanted to write a book. Nothing groundbreaking, just something he felt needed to be said. He mentioned it to his friend one afternoon over coffee, casually, almost testing the waters to see how the idea would land. And his friend, well-intentioned and completely sincere, immediately launched into all the reasons it wouldn't work. The market is completely oversaturated. Nobody reads anymore, not really. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get published? Most authors make almost nothing, even the ones who do get a deal. The friend wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. Honest about his own internalized beliefs about creativity and risk. Honest about what he'd convinced himself was possible in a world that felt increasingly closed to people like them. But Robert listened, nodded politely to show he appreciated the concern, and then went home and wrote anyway. Not because he thought his friend was wrong about the challenges, but because he realized his friend's limitations had nothing to do with his own potential. Within 18 months, he'd finished the book. It wasn't a bestseller, it didn't change the world, but it existed. And that existence meant more to him than all the practical reasons it shouldn't. That's the choice you have to make, over and over again. Will you let other people's fear dictate your decisions? Or will you trust that your vision matters more than their comfort? Will you shrink yourself to fit their expectations? Or will you grow beyond what they thought was possible? Sometimes protecting your vision means limiting what you share and with whom. Not everyone deserves access to your dreams, especially in their fragile, early stages when they're most vulnerable to criticism and doubt. There are people who will support you, who will believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. And those are the people you lean on. The others, the ones who consistently question, diminish, or dismiss what you're trying to build. Those people get less information, less access, less opportunity to plant seeds of doubt. This doesn't make you secretive or dishonest. It makes you protective of something valuable. You wouldn't leave a newborn baby with someone who didn't know how to care for it. Why would you leave your dreams with people who don't know how to nurture them? Jennifer spent years sharing her goals with everyone who would listen, genuinely believing that accountability meant constant transparency. But every time she shared a new idea, someone had a reason it wouldn't work. Every time she celebrated a small win, someone reminded her how far she still had to go. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she started abandoning dreams before she even tried them, preemptively rejecting her own ideas because she'd already heard all the reasons they would fail. It wasn't until she stopped talking and started doing that things began to change. She kept her vision private, shared progress only with the 2 or 3 people who'd actually earned her trust, and ignored the casual inquiries from others about what she was up to these days. And in that space of protective silence, her vision had room to grow, to make mistakes, to evolve without constant scrutiny and judgment from people who'd never risked anything themselves. Protecting your vision also means being willing to outgrow relationships that no longer serve who you're becoming. Not every friendship is meant to last forever. Not every connection is supposed to survive your transformation. And trying to maintain relationships with people who are actively invested in keeping you the same is like trying to climb a mountain while someone holds your ankle. It's not just difficult, it's impossible. This doesn't mean burning bridges or cutting people off cruelly. It means creating space, redirecting energy, choosing where you invest your time and attention. Some people will respect that distance and eventually grow to meet you where you are. Others won't, and that's okay. You're not responsible for managing other people's comfort with your growth. You're responsible for protecting the life you're trying to build. The people who truly love you will find a way to support you even when they don't fully understand what you're doing. They might worry, they might question, but ultimately they'll trust that you know what you need better than they do. Those are your people. The rest are lessons in boundaries, in discernment, in the difference between love and control. Your vision doesn't need everyone's approval. It doesn't need validation from people who've never risked anything themselves. It needs protection, patience, and your unwavering belief that it matters. Even when the world around you insists it doesn't. Especially then. Chapter 10. You are the author of your story. Every single day, you're writing your story, not with words, but with choices. And the question isn't whether you're writing it. The question is whether you're writing it consciously or letting other people hold the pen. Most people live their entire lives as characters in someone else's narrative. They follow scripts written by their parents about what success should look like. They adopt storylines from society about when they're too old, too young, too inexperienced, or too late. They let past failures dictate future chapters, as if one bad decision 20 years ago permanently defined who they're allowed to become. And then they wonder why their life feels like it belongs to someone else. why they feel like spectators watching their own existence unfold rather than participants actively shaping it. But you're not a character in someone else's story. You're the author of your own. And the moment you realize that, everything changes. Not because your circumstances suddenly become easier, but because you finally understand that you have agency over what happens next. Michael was 53 when he finally understood this, though he'd spent most of his adult life believing the opposite. He'd grown up hearing his father's voice in his head, the one that said, real men didn't change careers, didn't chase dreams, didn't abandon stability for something as foolish as fulfillment. So Michael stayed in construction management for 30 years, even though every project felt the same. Even though he'd stopped caring about the work somewhere around year 12. Even though he came home every night exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. This is just what life is, he'd tell his wife whenever she gently suggested he might want to do something different. We all have responsibilities. We can't just do whatever we want. And he believed it. Genuinely believed that his life was something that happened to him rather than something he created. That his choices had already been made by forces beyond his control, his upbringing, his age, his obligations. Then his youngest daughter, 26 and fresh out of graduate school, turned down a prestigious job offer to start her own nonprofit. Michael's first reaction was panic. That's a huge risk, he told her over dinner, his voice carrying all the caution his father's voice had carried with him. You should take the stable job, build some savings, maybe try the nonprofit thing later when you're more established. His daughter looked at him with a mix of compassion and clarity that made him deeply uncomfortable. Dad, she said quietly, I don't want to wake up at 50 and realize I spent 30 years building someone else's dream because I was too scared to build my own. And in that moment, Michael saw himself clearly for the first time in decades. She wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about him. And the story he'd been telling himself, the one about responsibility and realism and just how life works, was suddenly revealed for what it really was. An excuse. A way to avoid the vulnerability of admitting he'd been living someone else's story because writing his own felt too terrifying. Within 6 months, Michael had left construction management and started his own woodworking business. Something he'd dreamed about since he was 20, but had dismissed as impractical, unrealistic, too risky. The first year was brutal. Financially, emotionally, practically. He made mistakes, lost money, questioned his decision at least once a week. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Alive. Not because the business was immediately successful, but because for the first time in decades, he was writing his own story instead of living out someone else's expectations of what his life should be. This is what it means to be the author of your story. Not that you control everything that happens, but that you choose how you respond to what happens. You don't get to decide whether obstacles appear, but you decide whether they stop you or redirect you. You don't get to choose your starting point, but you choose your direction. You don't control how other people react to your choices, but you control whether their reactions define your path. Every chapter of your life, up until now, has led you here, to this moment, to this choice. And yes, some of those chapters were painful. Some were written in handwriting that wasn't yours, during times when you didn't know you had permission to pick up the pen. Some chapters you'd rewrite if you could, decisions you'd unmake, words you'd take back, years you'd spend differently. But those chapters are finished. They're part of your story, but they don't have to dictate the rest of it. You can't edit what's already written, but you have complete control over what comes next. And that's both terrifying and liberating, because it means you're no longer waiting for permission, no longer bound by who you used to be, no longer limited by what others expect. Sarah spent 41 years believing her story had already been written. Grew up poor, never finished college, married young to a man who saw her more as an accessory than a partner. Spent 2 decades raising kids and managing a household while her own dreams gathered dust in the back of her mind. By the time her marriage ended, not with drama, but with the quiet acknowledgement that they'd become strangers sharing the same address, she felt like her life was essentially over. Not literally, but narratively. "I had my chance," she told her sister. "This is just what happens when you make certain choices." But her sister, who'd watched Sarah dim herself for years, asked a question that changed everything. If you could write the next chapter from scratch, what would it say? Sarah didn't have an answer at first. She'd spent so long living in the margins of her own life that imagining herself as the main character felt impossible. But slowly, carefully, she started to write a different story. She went back to school at 43, got her degree in social work, started working with women leaving difficult situations, women who reminded her of herself. And somewhere in the process of helping them rewrite their stories, she rewrote her own. 10 years later, Sarah looks back at that moment in her sister's kitchen. 41, divorced, feeling like her life was finished, and recognizes it for what it really was. Not an ending, but a beginning. The moment she stopped being a character in someone else's narrative and became the author of her own. Your story isn't over. It doesn't matter how old you are, how many mistakes you've made, how many years you've spent living according to someone else's script. As long as you're breathing, you're still writing. And the beauty of being the author is that you get to decide what happens in the next chapter, the next page, the next sentence. Maybe the next chapter is about courage. The courage to leave a relationship that's been dead for years. The courage to start a business everyone says will fail. The courage to admit you've been wrong about who you thought you had to be. Maybe it's about reinvention. Going back to school at 50, changing careers at 60, finally pursuing the dream you abandoned at 25 because someone convinced you it wasn't practical. Maybe it's about reconciliation, not with others, but with yourself, with the choices you made when you didn't know better, with the person you were before you understood you had the power to change. Or maybe it's about something simpler and more profound. Finally living as yourself instead of as the version of you that keeps everyone else comfortable. Finally choosing your own happiness instead of managing everyone else's expectations. Finally writing a story that feels true even if it doesn't look like anyone else's. Whatever your next chapter holds, it's yours to write. Not someday. Now. You don't need permission. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need anyone's approval or validation or blessing. You just need to pick up the pen and start writing. Messily, imperfectly, courageously. Because your story deserves to be told. And you're the only one who can tell it. Conclusion. Your new beginning starts now. You made it to the end. But this isn't really an ending. It's the moment where everything you've absorbed through these chapters starts to become real. Because understanding these concepts intellectually is one thing. But living them, applying them, choosing them every single day when it's hard and uncomfortable and easier to go back to old patterns, that's where transformation actually happens. So let's bring it all together. Not as theory, but as action. Not as someday intentions, but as right now choices. You've learned that blaming keeps you powerless, that victim mentality destroys your future, that excuses cost you everything you actually want. You've learned that ownership gives you control, that systems make success inevitable, that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation for real change. You've learned that readiness is a myth, that your vision needs protection, and that you're the author of your own story whether you've been acting like it or not. Now what? Starting today, you have a choice to make in every moment where you feel stuck, frustrated, or powerless. You can default to the old pattern, blame, excuse, wait, or you can choose differently. And that choice, repeated day after day, is what determines whether this book was just something you listened to or something that actually changed your life. So here's what you do next. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently and honestly. First, identify one area where you've been blaming someone or something else for where you are. Just one area. Maybe it's your career, and you've been blaming your boss, your industry, the economy. Or maybe it's your health, and you've been blaming your metabolism, your schedule, your genetics. Maybe it's your relationships, and you've been blaming your partner, your past, your circumstances. Pick one area, write it down if you need to, and then ask yourself this question. If I were 100% responsible for improving this area, what would I do today? Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but today. Second, face the truth about where you actually are. Not where you wish you were, not where you tell people you are, but where you actually are right now. If you're in debt, know the exact number instead of avoiding the bank statements. If you're unhappy in your relationship, admit it clearly instead of hiding behind, "We're going through a rough patch." If your health is declining, stop pretending you'll deal with it later when life calms down. The truth won't punish you, but avoiding it will. Write down one hard truth you've been avoiding, look at it, feel the discomfort, and then decide what you're going to do about it. Third, build one simple system that makes the right choice automatic. Don't try to overhaul your entire life at once. Pick one behavior you want to change and design a system that makes it easier to do the right thing than the wrong thing. Want to exercise consistently? Put your gym clothes by your bed so you see them first thing in the morning. Want to save money? Set up an automatic transfer so the money moves before you can spend it. Want to write that book? Block 30 minutes on your calendar every single day at the same time, non-negotiable. One system, one area. Make it so simple you can't fail. Fourth, take one action before you feel ready. It doesn't need to be a big action or a life-changing leap, just one small, imperfect, terrifying step toward the thing you've been waiting to feel ready for. Send the email you've been drafting for 3 months, make the call you've been avoiding, sign up for the class, submit the application, start the project. Readiness comes from doing, not from waiting. So do something today that scares you just enough to prove to yourself that you can. Fifth, protect your vision by sharing it only with people who've earned that trust. Stop announcing your dreams to everyone and then wondering why you feel deflated and discouraged. Your vision is fragile right now, and not everyone knows how to handle fragile things with care. Choose 1 or 2 people who actually believe in you. Not the ones who say they do, but always find a reason why it won't work. And share your progress with them. Everyone else gets surface-level information until your vision is strong enough to withstand their doubt. Finally, remind yourself every single day that you're the author of your story. Not your parents, not your past, not your failures or your circumstances or the people who told you who you're supposed to be. You. This is your story. And every choice you make, every small action you take, every moment you choose ownership over blame, readiness over waiting, truth over comfort. That's you writing it. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to transform overnight. You just need to make one choice today that moves you closer to the person you're trying to become, and then make another choice tomorrow, and another the day after that. Because transformation isn't a single moment. It's It's 1,000 small decisions that compound over time into a completely different life. So here's your real question, the one that matters more than anything else in this book. What's the one thing you're going to do today? Not think about, not plan for, but actually do. Right now, before you move on to the next thing. Before life distracts you. Before the fear convinces you to wait just a little longer. Choose one thing, do it today, and then tomorrow, choose again. Because your new beginning doesn't start someday, it starts now. It started the moment you decided to stop blaming and start living. The only question is whether you'll keep going. Choose one thing, do it today, and then tomorrow, choose again. Because your new beginning doesn't start someday. It starts now. It started the moment you decided to stop blaming and start living. The only question is whether you'll keep going. And I believe you will. Not because it will be easy. Not because you'll never doubt yourself again. But because you picked up this book for a reason. Something in you knows that the life you've been living isn't the life you're meant to be living. Something in you is ready to stop waiting, stop blaming, stop shrinking yourself to fit into a story someone else wrote for you. That something is your future self, calling you forward, reminding you that it's not too late, it's never too late, as long as you're willing to start. And you are. You wouldn't have made it this far if you weren't. So take that first step today, and then take another tomorrow. And keep taking them, one after another, until the person you're becoming is no longer just a vision, but a reality. Your life is waiting for you to claim it. Go claim it.